about a month ago, I made a video about repaint toys and what that can symbolize for a toy line in the long term. And this video tended to create more questions than answers, so I thought I would do a follow-up. The video that I did was released around the time of PowerCon, which is the He-Man convention, and I talked specifically about some reveals at the show and what that meant as far as figures that were repaints versus new tools. Obviously, repaints happen a lot in different Masters of the Universe toy lines. Specifically, though, I was looking at the figures for Origins that were released or revealed at the show, and I'm sorry this image is a little grainy. Unfortunately, it was the best one I could come up with at the time. But hey, deal with it, because. Anyway, so 50% of the figures in this image are repaints, straight repaints. As an example, Anti-Eternia He-Man. I'm using the example from Classics here, obviously, because it's a higher quality image, but it shows how he's just a repaint. And repaints are a common thing in a lot of toy lines, and like Masters of the Universe. And a lot of the comments on that video were about how, well, Masters of the Universe is always a line about shared parts. It's been like that since the beginning. And yes, when Motu launched, it had 3 basic body types, reptile, human, and beastie, and all the figures were made with this body, except for, obviously, Teela, who was a full tool. But there's a difference between shared parts and a repaint. This is a repaint, meaning it's a figure that is literally the exact same as a previous figure, just in a different color. It's not about shared parts, it's about the deco on an existing combination of parts. This is also a repaint. It's an exact same Han Solo figure, just with a different face sculpt. And actually, I think they used a slightly different fabric for the cloak, or the coat. But regardless, I'm talking about repaints. This is a repaint. Not multiple toys in the same line share parts, meaning they might share the same arms or legs or, heads, armor, that type of thing. And repaints have been happening for decades, and some of them are highly collectible and are huge parts of the toy collecting community, like this Riddler figure made from Green Lantern, or the original Decepticon planes that were all repaints of each other but represented unique characters. So there's nothing bad about repaints. Repaints can allow toy companies to put out more characters. This Zoom used to be the Flash in the Total Justice line from Kenner. And back to Motu, Battle Cat and Panther used to be a tiger from Big Jim, and before that a panther, and Motu, the word, panther, from a Tarzan line. So yes, you could do really cool things with repaints. I mean, in G.I. Joe, Tomax and Zama were the same exact figure with a slight repaint where the logo is on the opposite side of the chest. They're twins, so it's kind of like a joke. And repaints can allow you to have really dynamic characters, like, evil versions, like Faker, or this evil version of Optimus Prime. So, what I'm getting at is repaints are great, but when they're sprinkled throughout a line, meaning they show up every so often, as opposed to when you jam a line completely full of repaints. All right, what do I mean by this?
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
So, repaints can obviously allow toy companies to create new versions of existing characters. In this case, you also have a new head added to Mr. Fantastic, but the body, 90% of the figure is the same. For this Spider-Man example, you have 0 change to parts, same head, same body, same everything, just a new deco, making it classic suit red and blue versus black Spidey. All right, so why do toy companies redeco or use minimal new parts? Because all toys made of plastic come from molds, from injection molding machines, which are these big metal things you see here. And they're really expensive to make. We're talking $50,000 to $100,000 for a 6-inch figure that is fully tooled. So obviously, when you can reuse parts, that helps. And when you have a fully tooled figure, you want to amortize the cost of that tool and try to use it more than once. That's where repaints come from. So the thing to remember is that the more sales a toy line gets, the more tooling it's going to be allocated so that it could have more figures, more product out there to sell even more. So think of tooling as a resource that a toy line gets from a toy company completely based on its sales. So higher sales, you're going to be allocated by the company more tooling dollars. Now, again, repaints are great when they show up every so often, but when they're used to pay for the line, meaning all the figures are repainted, that is something to take note of. And obviously, some repaints are more acceptable than others. Some that actually make sense and some that are done, for fun. But as an overall rule of thumb, I have found from my 25 years of doing this that you want to be at about 10%. And if you're at more than this, more than 10% of your line is a repaint, it means that your line's not getting enough resources. And why is it not getting enough resources? Well, because it may not be selling well enough. And that means the brand manager and the designers need to start doing clever things and find ways to use existing tooling to try to create new characters or new decos for existing characters. Maybe a space armor becomes an ice armor, things like that. And you can really see this in certain lines where they'll take an existing tool, a mold, for one figure and just with deco find a way to turn that into another character. Sometimes it's done in a very clever way, and it works. An example of when this wasn't working as much might be the 2000X Masters of the Universe line, the 2001-2002 line that came out like 30 years ago at this point. Wow, that's aging me. So in the second year of the line, you started seeing a lot of repaints, like a lot of repaints. Almost every character got kind of a Snake Man repaint. I mean, some of them were still on red cards, but they were getting repaints, some of them a little bit cool. They started to get wacky with, Too Bad in reversed colors, and then Skeletor started getting, kind of weird colors, and then he got a really weird color in this version, which is notoriously known as Disco Skeletor. And yes, I know he came out before the green cards, but this is a perfect example of a repaint that kind of went too far. But all of these were cost-saving measures. So the key takeaway to all of my babbling is that obviously toys are fun, and toy designers always have fun in mind. And for a lot of kids, sometimes they don't care what color their Luke Skywalker or Skeletor is in. But when you look at the cost of tooling and how much of a capital cost this is, and again, we're talking like the cost of a luxury car here, you're going to be allocated tooling based on how well your toy line, your product line, is doing. And the better it sells, the more resources you get, the more tooling, and the more diverse characters. You can obviously do clever things with repaints, again, like Hasbro did in the vintage G.I. Joe line, probably one of the coolest repaint concepts ever. You don't get too many twins in toy lines out there. Well, I guess, maybe Pet Joe and Scarlet Witch, but anyway, I'm on a tangent. The point is, looking at the reveals at PowerCon for Motu Origins, which is what started this whole process, 50% of the figures revealed are straight repaints, meaning no new parts at all. And from my experience, this tends to be a sign when you see lines that have 50% repaints that sales are not doing as well because they're not getting as many resources. You don't have to have 100% tooled figures for every reveal, but you want to have like 10% of a wave. If there's 10 figures, one is a straight repaint. And again, a repaint is not the same as shared parts, because all of these figures share the same basic body, but they have new parts like heads and belts and boots. Or, a better example would be, these figures of the six-armed Spider-Man, new head, new hands, new boots, but same basic body. So they have shared parts, but they're not repaints. That's the difference. And when you have straight repaints with no shared parts at all, and when that becomes 50% of a wave, that, from my experience, tends to be a sign that a line is not getting the resources it needs because sales are not where they should be. So maybe it might be time to think of collecting a different line when you see a line revealed that it's all repaints. It tends to kind of mean that a line is running out of steam. That's why I was so excited that the Vintage series from Star Wars recently revealed all these brand new 100% sculpts. It reinvigorated the line. All right, so hopefully I clarified some of the questions spawned by the previous video. If you have more questions or comments, leave them below. I always answer them. I love hearing comments, and thank you for sharing and subscribing to the channel. It helps the algorithm. See you next time.